The empty terminal. Sophie Winters stared at her phone, the screen illuminating her face in the dim light of the airport lounge. 3 hours had passed since James was supposed to meet her with their luggage. 3 years together, and on their anniversary, he had vanished. Final boarding call for Flight 237 to Paris, the announcement echoed through the terminal. Sophie glanced at the 2 tickets in her hand, their edges now wrinkled from her nervous fidgeting. The romantic anniversary trip they'd planned for months was evaporating before her eyes. Her phone buzzed with a text notification. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. The apartment is yours. I've moved my things out." The air left her lungs in a painful rush. 3 years, dissolved in 23 cold words. No explanation, no goodbye. Just gone. "Miss, are you boarding?" The gate attendant's sympathetic smile pulled Sophie back to reality. "I don't think," Sophie began, then stopped herself. Paris, the city of lights, the trip she'd saved for over a year to afford. "Actually, yes, I am." The decision felt reckless and terrifying. Sophie had never traveled internationally alone. She'd always been the cautious one, the planner, while James was spontaneous and carefree. Perhaps that's why they'd fit together so well, or why she'd thought they did. As she settled into her window seat, Sophie closed her eyes, willing the tears not to fall. The empty seat beside her felt like an accusation. "Excuse me, is anyone sitting here?" Sophie opened her eyes to see a man with kind brown eyes and an apologetic smile gesturing to the vacant seat. He had a camera bag slung over his shoulder and looked slightly disheveled, as if he'd rushed to make the flight. "No," she replied, quickly wiping her eyes. "It's empty." "Mind if I'd take it? They overbooked my section." His voice was warm, with a slight accent she couldn't place. Sophie nodded, gathering her bag from the seat. As he settled in, she noticed the well-worn leather of his camera case, covered in stickers from destinations around the world. "I'm Lucas," he offered, extending his hand. "Lucas Rivera." "Sophie Winters," she replied, her handshake tentative. "First time to Paris?" he asked, buckling his seatbelt as the plane began to taxi. "Yes, well, supposed to be," she trailed off, unsure why she was sharing anything with this stranger. Lucas seemed to sense her hesitation. "Paris is magical, even alone. Sometimes, especially alone." He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "The city has a way of healing what's broken." The plane accelerated down the runway, pressing Sophie back against her seat. As they lifted into the night sky, she felt something unexpected. A tiny flicker of possibility where only emptiness had existed moments before. "Are you a photographer?" she asked, nodding toward his camera bag, surprised at her own desire to continue the conversation. Lucas's face lit up. "Travel photographer, heading back after a shoot in New York." "Back? You live in Paris?" "For now. I move around a lot, but Paris has been home base for the last year." He paused, studying her face. "If you need recommendations while you're there, I know all the spots tourists miss." As the plane climbed above the clouds, Sophie felt the weight of James's betrayal momentarily lift. 8 hours to Paris. 8 hours to decide what came next in the life suddenly unrecognizable. "I might take you up on that," she said softly, watching the last lights of the city disappear beneath them. Unexpected seatmate. The Atlantic Ocean stretched endlessly below as Sophie awakened from a fitful sleep. For a disorienting moment, she reached for James before reality crashed back. The empty apartment, the text message, the abandoned anniversary plans. Instead, her hand nearly brushed against Lucas, who was absorbed in reviewing photographs on his camera's display. "Sorry?" she murmured, quickly withdrawing her hand. Lucas looked up with a gentle smile. No need to apologize. Did you manage to get some rest? Not really, Sophie admitted, adjusting her position in the cramped economy seat. Hard to sleep when your 3-year relationship implodes hours before an anniversary trip. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Something about being suspended between continents, beside a stranger she likely never see again after landing, made honesty feel safer. He left you at the airport? Lucas's expression darkened. That's beyond cruel. With a text message? Sophie added, surprised by the bitter laugh that escaped her. 3 years together? And I get 23 words? Lucas set his camera down. I can't imagine anyone walking away from you like that. His words, simple and direct, somehow made her feel both seen and embarrassed. Sophie gazed out the window, watching sunlight glint off the ocean far below. What will you do in Paris? Lucas asked after a moment of silence. Sophie shrugged. I have a hotel reservation for 2 and an itinerary full of romantic cliches. She smiled sadly. Maybe I'll just hide in the room and order room service for a week. Or, Lucas suggested, you could experience Paris on your terms instead of the trip you planned with him. The flight attendant interrupted with breakfast service, placing trays before them. As they ate, Lucas described his favorite hidden corners of Paris: a tiny bookshop with a secret garden, a cafe where local musicians gathered after midnight, a footbridge with the most beautiful sunrise view of Notre Dame. I could show you, if you'd like. Then he quickly added, no pressure. I understand if you'd rather be alone. Sophie studied him. His sincere expression, the thoughtful way he waited for her response without expectation. In another life, she might have declined politely, maintained her boundaries with this handsome stranger. But her carefully constructed life had already shattered. Perhaps it was time to embrace the unexpected. I'd like that, she said, surprising herself. But I should warn you, I'm probably terrible company right now. Lucas's smile reached his eyes. I doubt that very much. When they landed at Charles de Gaulle Airport, Sophie felt a surge of panic. The reality of being alone in a foreign country suddenly overwhelmed her. She followed the crowd toward customs, Lucas walking beside her. Where are you staying? He asked as they waited in the passport control line. Hotel Saint-Germain, in the 6th arrondissement. That's actually not far from my apartment. Would you like to share a taxi? The metro with luggage can be challenging your first time. Relief washed over her. That would be wonderful, thank you. Paris greeted them with soft spring rain, the city's famous landmarks shrouded in mist. As their taxi navigated narrow streets, Sophie pressed her forehead against the cool window, watching Parisians hurry along with umbrellas, ducking into bakeries and cafes. It's beautiful, she whispered. Even in the rain. Especially in the rain, Lucas corrected. Paris wears rain like jewelry. When they reached her hotel, Lucas helped with her luggage. Standing under the awning, Sophie suddenly felt awkward. Thank you for everything. Would tomorrow be too soon for showing you my Paris? Sophie hesitated only briefly. Tomorrow would be perfect. As she watched him walk away through the rain, Sophie felt something unexpected stir within her, not healing yet, but perhaps the willingness to begin. Parisian Revelations. The morning light filtered through cream-colored curtains as Sophie awoke in her hotel room. For one blissful moment, she forgot everything, then remembered where she was and why she was alone. The king-size bed felt vast and empty, the room's romantic touches now seeming like cruel jokes. Her phone chimed with a text from Lucas. Cafe across from your hotel in an hour? Unless you've changed your mind. Sophie smiled despite herself. I'll be there. The cafe was quintessentially Parisian. Small round tables, wicker chairs facing the street, the aroma of fresh coffee and pastries filling the air. Lucas was already waiting, his camera on the table beside a sketchbook. "You draw too?" Sophie asked, sliding into the chair opposite him. "Poorly," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile, "but it helps me compose shots sometimes." Over breakfast, they mapped out their day. The Louvre first, but not the crowded rooms housing the Mona Lisa. Instead, Lucas guided her through lesser-known wings where they could appreciate the art without jostling through crowds. "How did you become a photographer?" Sophie asked, as they wandered through a gallery of Renaissance sculptures. "I was an economics major headed for a corporate career. Then my mother died suddenly my senior year. It changed everything, made me realize life is too short to spend it chasing security over passion." His honesty disarmed her. "I'm so sorry about your mother." "It was 7 years ago," he said gently, "but it shaped everything after." "What about you? What do you do when you're not being abandoned in airports?" Sophie laughed softly at his directness. "I'm a children's book editor. Not very exciting, but I love it." "That's beautiful," Lucas said, "helping shape stories that form young minds." They spent the afternoon wandering through Montmartre, where Lucas photographed her against whitewashed buildings and cobblestone streets. Initially self-conscious, Sophie gradually relaxed under his patient direction. "These are lovely," she said, reviewing the photos on his camera. "You've made me look like yourself," Lucas finished when she trailed off, "just as you are." The simple compliment warmed her more than elaborate praise would have. As evening approached, they found themselves at a small bistro tucked away from tourist paths. Over wine and coq au vin, Sophie found herself sharing more about her relationship with James. "The signs were there," she admitted. "He'd been distant for months. I just didn't want to see them." "That's not your failure," Lucas said. "It's his for not being honest." As she described their relationship, patterns emerged that seemed obvious now. How James had gradually isolated her from friends, dismissed her career achievements, made her feel lucky to have him rather than equal in their partnership. "I sound pathetic," Sophie sighed, swirling the last of her wine. "No," Lucas said firmly, "you sound like someone who believed in love and commitment. Those aren't flaws, Sophie." After dinner, they walked along the Seine, the city lights shimmering on the water's surface. When Sophie shivered in the evening breeze, Lucas draped his jacket over her shoulders. The warmth of it, and the subtle scent of his cologne, enveloped her comfortingly. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," Lucas said, as they leaned against the stone wall overlooking the river. Sophie considered the question. "I've always wanted to write children's books, not just edit them, but James said it was impractical." "What's your story about?" "A little girl who builds a hot air balloon to visit the stars." Lucas stopped walking and turned to face her. "That sounds wonderful. Why haven't you written it?" The question, so simple and direct, made her throat tighten. "I guess I stopped believing in myself." Perhaps that's what Paris should be about, not forgetting him, but remembering yourself. As they reached the Pont des Arts, where thousands of lovers once secured padlocks before the tradition was banned, Sophie felt something shift inside her, not healing completely, but a crack opening to let light through. Under the Parisian stars, with this stranger now becoming something more, Sophie wondered if some endings were really beginnings in disguise. Return flight. Sophie's final days in Paris passed in a dreamlike haze of intimate moments and new discoveries. By day, they explored hidden corners of the city, a secret garden behind an unassuming door in Le Marais, an artist's studio where Lucas occasionally exhibited his work, a tiny jazz club where they danced until dawn. By night, they returned to Lucas's apartment, where whispered confessions and tender embraces created a cocoon against reality's inevitable intrusion. On her last evening in Paris, Lucas prepared dinner on his small balcony. Wine, cheese, fresh bread, and a ratatouille he insisted was his specialty. "This is amazing," Sophie said, savoring the flavors. "You've been hiding your culinary talents." I have many hidden talents, he teased, refilling her wine glass. As they ate, watching the sunset paint the Parisian skyline in shades of gold and pink, the unspoken question of tomorrow hung heavy between them. I've been thinking, Lucas began carefully, setting down his fork, about what happens after tonight. Sophie's heart constricted. And? I have an assignment in New York next month, a 3-week project documenting urban renewal. His eyes held hers. I could come earlier, stay longer. Hope fluttered in her chest, but caution tempered it. Lucas, I don't want to be something you feel obligated to pursue. He reached across the table, taking her hand. This isn't obligation, Sophie. This is the first time in years I've wanted to change my plans for someone. What about your fear of roots? She challenged gently. Some fears are worth confronting. Some people are worth staying for. Later that night, as they lay tangled in his sheets, Lucas traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. There's another option, he said quietly. What's that? You could stay. Not forever, necessarily, but longer than a week. Sophie propped herself up on her elbow, studying his face in the dim light. Stay in Paris? Your job is remote, isn't it? You mentioned editing manuscripts from home. Yes, but think about it, Lucas urged. Paris could be the perfect place to finish your children's book. No distractions, no reminders of James, just you and your creativity. The possibility was both exhilarating and terrifying. My lease in New York, my life there. Is it really your life anymore? Or is it the life you built around someone who didn't deserve you? His question struck a chord so deep it almost hurt. Sophie fell silent, considering the apartment she'd shared with James, now empty of his things, but still haunted by memories. The job she loved but could do from anywhere. The friends who had drifted away during her relationship. Connections waiting to be rebuilt, regardless of where she lived. I'm not asking forever, Lucas clarified. I'm asking for time, to see if this is real or just Paris working its magic. Morning came too quickly. As Sophie packed her suitcase in Lucas's apartment, each item seemed heavier than before, weighted with the decision she still hadn't made. At Charles de Gaulle Airport, they stood awkwardly in the departures hall, surrounded by travelers rushing in all directions. This is where we met, Sophie observed, trying to keep her voice light. Full circle, Lucas agreed, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. The boarding announcement for her flight echoed through the terminal. Sophie clutched her passport, her knuckles white with tension. I should go, she said, not moving. Lucas nodded, pulling her into a tight embrace. Whatever you decide, these days with you have been a gift, he whispered against her hair. When they separated, Sophie saw unshed tears in his eyes, matching the ones threatening her own composure. He handed her an envelope. Don't open it until you're on the plane. Sophie took a step toward security, then another. Each step felt wrong, as if she were walking in the wrong direction. At the entrance to the security checkpoint, she turned for one last look at Lucas, who stood exactly where she'd left him, watching her with an expression of such naked longing it made her breath catch. In that moment, clarity struck with the force of lightning. Sophie had spent 3 years compromising for a man who abandoned her without a backward glance. Now she had found someone who saw her completely, who encouraged rather than diminished her dreams, who offered possibilities instead of limitations. And she was walking away. Final boarding call for Flight 418 to New York, the announcement blared. Sophie looked at her boarding pass, then at Lucas, and made her decision. 3 hours later, sitting in a cafe near Lucas's apartment, Sophie called her boss to arrange an extended remote work period. Then she texted her landlord about subletting her apartment. Finally, she opened Lucas's envelope, which contained a single photograph. Herself, laughing on the Pont des Arts at sunrise, looking more alive than she had in years.
On the back, he had written, "Some journeys aren't meant to end." When Lucas returned home that evening, he found Sophie waiting outside his door, her suitcase beside her. "You missed your flight," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "I caught a different one," she replied, a smile spreading across her face, "a return flight to myself." His face broke into a brilliant smile as he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in a joyful embrace. As his lips found hers, Sophie knew that while Paris might have been the setting for their beginning, the story they would write together was just unfolding. A journey without a predetermined destination, but with the promise of companionship for as many chapters as they chose to share. In choosing to stay, Sophie wasn't just choosing Lucas, she was choosing herself, her dreams, and the courage to rewrite her story on her own terms. What had begun as an ending had transformed into something far more beautiful, a beginning.